is first review the next steps prior to starting on agenda item 2.02, the capital improvement plan. We were going to review the next steps from our first work session, which was our Goal 1 student success. So if we could see that up there. Sure. Can we have somebody from our Mary Beth? Excuse me, we're trying to bring up the next steps. Are we having an IT issue? I think that's what it is. Just one moment before we move on to the next agenda item. Is there no projection or just? We can do it at the end of our next session, maybe in order to move forward. We will, we'll start out, and what we'll do is we will go over,
No,
that's,
different one. It's all about you, Jeff, on the screen right now, so.
Miss Quinn.
Yes. Oh, I thought you were being facetious. No.
Well,
Miss,
I think,
are you ready to get this part started?
yeah, I think we should, Mr. Blattenberg. I think our personal needs can be addressed at another moment in time. So as we move on, we are a little behind schedule, but, you know, please take your time to be thorough and go through this information, just saying. So the next one is our capital improvement plan, and I will direct this to Mr. Jeff Plattenberg and Mr. Kevin Sneed.
If I might make a couple of comments just very
Yes, ma'am.
quickly. First of all, I want to acknowledge the hard work of everyone sitting at the end of the table and plus their entire team. Probably a number of them are in the room with us. I'm sure you'll introduce them. A lot of work has gone into each year getting this document better and better and integrating as much of the important information as possible. I recognize that's a lot of work, puts a lot of work on the team, and I do appreciate it because I can see for myself how much is getting better on an annual basis. I do want to comment, there were a number, at the hearing, I think we only had like 5 people signed up. I think that means that a lot of the issues or concerns that were raised or maybe questions that we could answer had been addressed prior to the hearing. So I think that's the good news. With regard to the questions that were raised about the AAP Center at Cooper Middle School, as has been pointed out to the public in the past, anytime there's anything referenced in this document, this is our plan. This is our educated plan for how we'll deal with the challenges that we face with regard to our facilities and capacity. There are other processes that are governed by regulation and board policy that requires a level of input before a recommendation is brought to the board. So we are underway with that process with regard to the Cooper AAP Center. That decision has not been finalized. We're just now in the process of engaging the community, getting input, talking about the possibilities. There's a survey. We sent you an update on Friday in the superintendent's update. But that decision will bring a recommendation to you all based upon the feedback that we received from the community. And I believe that's scheduled for your consideration in February. So just to kind of, wrap that up with regard to what you heard about the CIP at the hearing specifically for this purpose. That process is governed in a different it's related to capital facilities, but we do have another process. And should that happen, it would require your approval for us to move forward. And if you approve the moving forward of that, the timeline under which that would be approved, you would have a lot to say about that. So I just thought I'd wrap up kind of with regard to what we heard from the community. Thank you for allowing me kind of provide that overview, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Plattenberg to respond to any questions that you might have. I'd also, remind the public that we've already had your presentation on this, your in-depth presentation. So this is a follow-up. We've had actually a number of meetings with the board developed in leading up to the document. There was a formal presentation. I can't remember what the date was, Jeff. There was a public hearing just recently on this as well. So this is not the only conversation we've had with the board about this document. It's all yours.
Correct. Thank you, Dr. Garza. Yeah, in fact, on December 17th was when the formal presentation of 2015. We did have a public hearing Tuesday, and that was January 5th. And then the work session today, January 11th, and then hopefully, if we get everything right, we'll be seeking action on Thursday, January 21st. As was referenced, the CIP document has been an evolution. The number of meetings that we've had, including this work session, are really to address a lot of the items that have been identified that either need to be coordinated, included, adds, changes, and modifications, and so forth. As Dr. Garza mentioned, we did receive a lot of feedback from a number of community members, and also you have received feedback and had given us that input, and the majority of that information has been incorporated. In fact, there are 25 different items that we've made adjustments to since the inception of this document. And I will say, with the other people that spoke, a number of the people have been speaking about the AAP. There are issues and concerns that are still outstanding. Falls Church High School is another one that frequently comes up. And as we've talked about in separate work sessions about not only the capital improvement program, but also about our cap, the funding cap of $155 million, when we have $274 million worth of annual needs. That's one of the reasons why we have had this difficult struggle of when things are going to be accomplished and when they actually get in there. We've done a lot of great things in that area, but certainly we would love to be able to do more, and it really comes down to increasing that funding level. Even the Infrastructure Finance Committee, we found a way to increase by $13.1 million in bond funded by the shift and the operating fund things, which allowed us to move up the design of Falls Church High School in the CIP, which I think is significant, although people don't feel it's good enough. And I would really like to get everything done all at once. It's just unfortunately the environment we're in. But this CIP document does reflect a lot of those changes, a lot of those modifications. As I said, there are 25 of them. We did have, it is a 4-meeting event, the capital improvement program document, and we are ready to answer any questions that you may have. I know there are some concerns that are going to be raised today, so I won't go back through the presentation that is online. For those members of the public that may not have seen the previous publications or presentations, again, those dates were Thursday, December 17th, Tuesday, the public hearing, January 5th, and then today's work session, January 11th, with the upcoming school board meeting Thursday, January 21st.
All right, we can start with questions. Mr. Moon?
Thank you. I sent in my question yesterday or last night. Sorry that I didn't give you more time, advance notice on this question. But before I do actually go into that question, let me ask you about that 13.1 additional capital funding we are expecting from Board of Supervisors. When do you expect to see that money?
We already have it.
And how long is that commitment?
I'll let Ms. Quinn.
We do know it was also included in the county's fiscal forecast for FY17, so we believe that will be a recurring funding transfer from the county going forward. So we received 16 funding from year-end available balance from the county. Starting in FY17, it is currently in their fiscal forecast.
So can we now assume that instead of $155 million per year, can we assume that it is going to be 168?
Correct, yet we have to remember when we had the initial $155 million, Kevin's probably actually a better person to explain this, but we were using that $13 million for infrastructure items that was outside of renovation. So we will have the additional $13 million, so we will now truly have $155 million that could be put forward toward
Traditional capital funding
yes,
that they were
exactly.
expecting. But at least the 13.1 is, your understanding is that their commitment, ongoing commitment, it's not going to just end at FY17, it will go beyond. Okay, having said that,
But I think it's a
Yes.
very important question, Mr. Moon. I want to clarify. So with that said, just to add on to Mr. Moon's question, their consideration of that being an ongoing source of money, is it your expectation that that will be considered again at year end, assuming they have year end money, or if it's just being rolled into?
It's being built into their 17 base. So when you saw their 2-year fiscal forecast, there was a $13 million built in for 17, as well as $13 million for 18.
because
So
for the
it's in their-
FY16, there was a contingency, there was a
Yes.
contingent upon availability at year end.
Correct. Correct. But for 17 and forward, it should be built into their base. That is our understanding.
And going back to what Mr. Plattenberg said earlier during his short, brief, succinct presentation about our current annual need being about $274 million, and we only have about $100 million, more than $100 million less than what we need. So with that, the question I sent you yesterday, how do we deal with all these, probably about 1,000 learning colleges we have throughout the county? Will we ever discuss this with the county? Or will we discuss whether we're gonna have any proposal for school board members and the community to consider, also be able to present to the County Board of Supervisors? You think the situation is simply not resolvable, that we have no solution, that we just forget about that aspect?
Mm-hmm. Actually, Mr. Moon, that's an excellent question that you raised. You know, the discussion about temporary facilities or trailers. I know Mr. Sneed is not proud of the fact that has been quoted in the Washington Post about having the most trailers of any school division that we're aware of. Through the number of trailers that we actually have. And they are costly to have in existence. They're really not generally desirable. by members of the community and their students and our students. And we would prefer not to have them as well, but it is less costly, and they are considered temporary. But when I bring that up, everybody kind of chides and laughs when I talk about educational cottages that have been there 20 years. So it's an excellent point that you raise about potentially having a further discussion and dialogue about the use of trailers and so forth. Because we have many different types of programs. I know Mr. Sneed has some information relative to some of those programs, but we do have a lot of trailers.
I mean, I would advocate, I don't know what, where my colleagues might be on this one, that I would like to advocate for us to set aside the time to just to focus on the issue in once and for all, whether that we will stick with our conclusion that with current cash flow, that we have no solution, and we're not going to be able to address these issues, so let's forget about that, let's not even bring that up in the future, or we come up with some suggestion and present to the community and the County Board of Supervisors.
Team, is it possible to come up with a proposed strategy to Mr. Point's question, to Mr. Moon's question, just a straw man plan for what it would look like, assuming we said we're going to eliminate all of our temporary facilities that are being used as classroom space. I know in some cases we may have an extra here and there that are being used for parent resource centers, that kind of thing. But I'm really speaking of, I think Mr. Moon's speaking of every one of our temporary buildings that are being used as classrooms and what that could cost. Is that possible to come up with a draft of that?
Yes, ma'am. We can do that.
Okay.
And
then-
we'll also identify the clarity between modulars and so forth that's in the CIP, but have a comprehensive.
So, Mr. Moon, you would like that as the next step?
As a next step, if you could schedule a time certain for discussion, if you could in your analysis, information to be provided to board members, also include staff thoughts on. I mean, this has gotta be obvious. Benefits or lack thereof from using these temporary trailers.
Thank you. Ms. Evans, followed by Mr. Press.
Thank you. And I wanted to mention in the narrative, appreciate you looking at the new elementary schools that are proposed in this. I did want to make clear to everyone that in addition to what was in the narrative there, that we do include long-term a new elementary school at the Wilston site. That is in the overall CIP, even though it didn't get listed in the narrative. So thank you for including Wilston in there.
Thank you.
Falls Church, thank you, Mr. Plattenberg, for raising that. You know I'm going to raise issues about Falls Church High School. I have sent, just for our new board members, I want to be sure you know the situation with Falls Church High School. Falls Church is our last legacy high school. We are still many years away. If we do nothing, we're many years away from it getting a full renovation. Just that's where it was put in the queue in 2008. And so our facility staff have done a great job of trying to do some temporary fixes for parts of the building, but we still, it desperately needs a renovation. And one of the issues that has been raised most recently is its lack of a sprinkler system. Falls Church is one of only 2 high schools in Fairfax County now that does not have a sprinkler system. We saw the importance of that with the most recent incident at Woodson High School. We've got chemistry labs at all of our high schools. I have asked a question, and Mr. Plattenberg, I don't believe you're going to be able to answer it today, but I have asked what it would cost for us to add a sprinkler system at Falls Church High School throughout the building. And I will look forward to getting the answer to that question. Do you have a ballpark at all, or do you want to just wait to?
If you won't mind, I'd like to actually wait until staff is looking at it. We could throw a swag number on square foot, which is what we usually do, is based upon normally a square foot for sprinkling a building based upon our renovation example and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wouldn't mind, I'd really like to hold off.
Sure, that would be fine. We also have a program there for physically disabled students, so we have quite a few students there who are in wheelchairs. And that's a significant piece of what they do there. So that's a high school that's working very hard to try to accommodate all of their students while they wait and wait for a renovation that it badly needs. Another question I would have, I have seen the answer to the question about ADA compliance, and I know we are in compliance with ADA, but only because Falls Church is so old, and so they don't have to come up to the latest ADA standards. So another question I've had, and I'm sorry, Mr. Plattenberg, I didn't send this to you earlier, but what would it cost us to come up to the latest ADA standards at that school in terms of building changes? I believe the latest ADA requirements came in, was it 1990? Something like that? And it was after the time
I mean,
when,
that's the inception of the ADA was around 92.
okay, and so 92, and so we don't have to come up to the 92 standards because Falls Church is so old.
Well, I mean, the ADA is not, and I know I've answered this, but the ADA is not like a regular code, a building code. What happens each year, a lot of these decisions are based upon court cases. So the law evolves. It's really a law, but it expands and eventually is incorporated into a building code or plumbing, mechanical, whatever addresses that. So no matter the age of any building, when you have a new code that's written, you're going to have a lot of buildings that would not comply to prior code.
Right, but we
This will
don't
be a
comply with a
very-
code that was written in 1992, right?
And basically, and one of the things that we do, and a lot of whenever there's an issue that needs to be addressed in an individual school to make an accommodation, we make those accommodations, and that's pretty much the evolution of the fact that the ADA. But I certainly won't. One of the things that we've talked about before, when we go in and do our renovations, one of the things we do address is bringing everything up to the current codes, right, and everything up to the current standards
right.
and our educational specifications.
Right.
So you could go on and on about any one of those individual elements within the older facilities, and we totally are in agreement with you about bringing them up to the current standards.
Okay, I appreciate that. And lastly, just picking up on Mr. Moon's question, I appreciate his raising that. And I also think that we should not ignore the modulars. I do have one school that almost half of their classroom space is now in modulars, and so when we do this analysis, I would appreciate seeing how much it would cost to no longer have modulars. I know it's a different animal than the trailers, but because we include it in capacity, I think it's important for us to see what would it take for that to be core building space. So, thank you.
Mr. Press, followed by Mr. McElveen.
Thank you. I want to echo that last point about modulars before I get to Falls Church and then a couple other questions. I spent a fair amount of my academic career in modulars, and to me it was not significantly different than spending it in a trailer. So I think that having that data is important, and I think that separating it out from the brick and mortar capacity as opposed to the modular capacity. I know we don't treat it, we treat it the same way in our numbers, but I think having that would be very valuable for me to see. I also want to pick up on the points that Ms. Evan made about Falls Church High School. I had the privilege to visit with them on last week, and just completely by a matter of coincidence, we had a fire drill during that period that I was there, and we had a fair amount of students with physical disabilities in the room participating in the roundtable, and we faced a bottleneck issue at the exit way, the doors to get outside during the fire drill, with physically getting the wheelchairs through the doorways. And so when we talk about ADA compliance and issues with our physical disabilities students in that school, it's jeopardizing student safety in my eyes when we cannot physically facilitate an egress like that, when we have to wait and kind of jiggle the wheelchairs through the doorways. And so that was very concerning to me, and I want to make sure that was something that was on your radar and something that we were kind of cognizant of when we're working with the CIP. An issue that I get a lot of email traffic about and conversations from students, and I'm sure that you all have heard a lot about this given our Energy Star ratings, is students are very concerned with environmental sustainability and green schools, eco-conscious schools. So I wanted to ask kind of what investments we're making in that direction, how we're working towards environmental sustainability. I know we've seen significant cost avoidance as a result of our reductions in Energy Star certification and whatnot. Just kind of moving forward, how we're incorporating that into future school buildings and modifying current ones to be more sustainable.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Press, for two things. First of all, if there's ever anything that you happen to see, or anyone else really, that they think jeopardizes safety, the sooner I can find out that information, the more we can address it, because that's an area where we don't compromise. That building does have the proper egress for wheelchairs, but if there's an execution problem that isn't accommodated, or if it is, for example, having to get over a lip of something that's more of a problem. In fact, I was just starting to craft an email to my director of security to make sure that they go ahead and review what Falls Church High School is doing, and if there needs to be any assistance, that we go ahead and assist them in their plans. So thank you for bringing that up. But the second point that you brought up about what we're doing, we're very proud of what we've been doing. Not only the Energy Star being the largest school division in the country in any one year, in a number of years to have achieved what we have achieved. That's a conservative effort to go ahead and try and achieve the recognition of energy savings, of cost avoidance, okay, and behavior modification. And we were ripe for the opportunity with that. But what we've been doing through our facilities program, and specifically through our capital improvement program, is we have a minimum of 1/3 of all of the expense, or if you will, all the improvements to that annual expenditure is towards energy conservation issues. Now, what does that mean, right? People always want to know, and it doesn't really always sound sexy or glamorous or anything when I talk about these things, but they're significant. If you look at the bioretention ponds and the filtration that we have, if you look at a lot of the things that Mr. Sneed has done, not only with, we talk about our carbon footprint and the improvements that he's provided, not only in the physical plant and the site and the energy efficient systems that are being installed, but you also look at the noise pollution that's occurred and the dissolution of a lot of that. We are really proud and have promoted in our OEs exactly a beneficial list as to the extent of what we've done, and I'll be happy to provide that information just as an edification so that it can be articulated, because when we look at this, it really is a comprehensive program. In fact, we have gone ahead and built a committee that includes Elaine Tholen from Instruction, who's presented at a formal school board meeting and talked about the Echo Schools and the Green Flag Program, which are partnership with the National Wildlife Federation, and all of those initiatives that are really powerful. But that is directly linked or inextricably linked to what we're doing not only on our maintenance side of the house, but also in the design and construction side of the house, and also with the energy conservation. So we have a sustainability team that has been formed. We also have members of the community. We have an individual of the Face of the Alliance group that's been appointed to that group because it is a partnership. It truly is everybody working together. But I'll go ahead and get you a list that hopefully can articulate a little bit more clear, because when I mentioned those filtera systems and the bioretention, and Mr. Sneed's done everything from even the roofing of being the white roofs to refract and reflect light and so forth, and as I said, the energy efficient equipment. The list kind of goes on and on and on and on, and I'll try to give you some context with what I provide you as well. And any further questions, you can follow back up with me, and I'd be glad to have you come meet with that committee too at some point if you'd be interested, because they do cover topics. One of the things we're trying to do right now is we're trying to, and then I'll shut up about this, but I get really excited, as the school board chair knows. One of the things we're trying to get them to do is to try to articulate this, to come up with a plan. We ended up having a campaign that we triggered off last year that was all about recycling. That what did we do? We worked with the individual high schools, the marketing aspects of that, and we went ahead and advertised with the actual high school students to have a competition where I put seed money in to have them come up with a way to not only expand the knowledge and awareness, but their participation in the recycling program. And because we had such creativity, I think we had a 3-way tie for first place. So I had to cough up a little bit more money, but it was worth it. So the same kind of thing, this committee is working on a way to go ahead and get the message out there a little more. I think that's a huge opportunity space for Fairfax County Public Schools, because we are a leader. We have staff that has served on the Consortium for High Performing Schools. Again, it goes on and on and on and on, but that is an opportunity space for us. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
All right, Mr. McElveen, followed by Ms. Schultz.
Just a very brief question. We heard from the speaker the other night that Falls Church and West Springfield were the only two schools without a sprinkler system. Do we know the historical context behind that?
I don't know that they're the only schools in the county. You mean the only
The
high
legacy high school,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
It just happened to be at the timing of those particular projects when they were bid. The next two that bid about a little over a year later were Herndon and Oakton, and they are sprinkled. They're not sprinkled like you would see sprinkled today, but that just like everything else, the sprinkler code evolved as well. At that time, we weren't required to sprinkle an existing facility. So I think those were bid in 1987 or 1988. That was a number of years ago. So that's really the context of it. It was just had to do with the time, the date.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, followed by Ms. Strauss.
So I'm going to ask the surprise question that nobody's expecting. What's the status of our SAC room conversion? 6,000 seats, 6,122 seats in our SAC rooms. Can we get those? And from our new board members, we have in quite a number of our elementary schools rooms that are quote unquote reserved, and the notion of what reserved or the definition of what reserved is during the day for SAC after school is a fluid response depending upon which school. But we have brick and mortar classrooms that are predominantly for SAC use. Yes, students may go in and test during the day, or they may be used for parent-teacher conferences or something, but they're not used for a classroom educational purpose during the day because they quote-unquote belong to the county. And if you took all of those seats and converted those to classrooms, I calculated at one point at our average classroom size at 21, 22, it would be like 6,000 seats. So I've been asking for, I think, 5 years, if we could come to an agreement with the county around using those and then converting potential SAC SAC-specific materials into lockable, rollable carts that we could preserve and protect SAC items. So where are we on our agreement, our negotiation, or anything?
Well, I should add some clarity to this. I guess it's about over the last 6 or 7 years when we either construct a new SAC space, it's usually 2, or build a new school, we only give SAC one of the 2 rooms for their exclusive use. So we reserve the second room as a multi-purpose room to be administered by the school principal. And what this does...
Which is often a trailer.
Well, I'm just talking about
More often
renovation.
than not.
Right. But I'm talking about when we renovate or new. It's the only time that I have enough leverage to...
I know,
kind of
I'm only
manipulate.
counting the ones that are actual classrooms, not the ones that are trailers.
Right. So these are the ones in the building. So one will be used as a multi-purpose room by the school. So typically abandoned, for abandoned strings, for, pull out, things of that nature. It's obviously not a full-time classroom, but we still need spaces for that supplemental programming. And so this is a number of classrooms in the recent past. It's probably somewhere in the 15 to 20, the quantity of that many. So we are gaining some of the space back, and they are being cooperative. There's only a few schools at this juncture in which the schools don't have access to at least one of the 2 SAC classrooms inside the building. The folks from the Office for Children I think are working with us, and it's improving.
Yeah, as a result of the request, we had gone ahead and met with staff for the Office for Children. We went over and discussed not only the partnership, but also the issues that I believe you raised during that same the comments period that you had provided us and the examples you had given us where there wasn't that type of partnership. In our discussions, they were pretty clear that they are committed to partnering with us. They did feel the need and identified the need for maintaining one of the two spaces. They weren't as receptive about that as they were focused on, and to be quite honest, and I was focused on making sure that where the spaces were where we weren't partnering. where
Okay,
we
so
did
this
have to make
is,
clarity.
before we go too much further down the road, because this is where I find us at cross purposes sometimes with understanding what the Board of Supervisors as a whole or individually think and what their staff think. Because when we've had discussions with them, they're somewhat incredulous, like, of course, why wouldn't you use that space for classrooms during the day? So I'm wondering if they're getting appropriate information from their staff that they can or can't relinquish that classroom. Because really what this comes down to is, sequestered space within our building. And the reason it's set up for SAC is because they are county-provided materials in those classrooms during the day that don't belong to us and don't belong to the children for educational use. They're for after-school purposes. But if we could provide a mechanism, and we've all seen them because we've all seen all the vendors, of locking rolling cabinets where we preserve, the ownership and sanctity of those materials, then you're talking about restoring. And yes, it may require flexible desks and all kinds of things, but real estate's at a premium here. And I do think, I've been asking for an exit strategy on trailers for probably 6 years. And I think every time we put one in, we should have an exit strategy. If one's going in, how are we getting out? And that's how we're honest brokers with the supervisors and holding them accountable for the distribution of capital monies. But I also think that part of that accountability comes with, we have reserved parking spaces, if you will, inside our buildings for SAC. And we've got to have that conversation because we need to own back. We're talking about building in Region 1 a brand new elementary school when in 5 years, as Ms. Huff pointed out, we're talking about 10 out of the 10 of the elementary schools there are going to be below 85% capacity. So we're going to build a new elementary school when we have the capacity, but we don't have the capacity in the right place. Well, maybe if we reclaimed some of those spaces within the resident buildings, we would have more flexibility and not be putting money to build a new school, but to use what we have wisely. So this is one of those, I'm going to channel Ms. Reed, in memoriam to her service on the board of, like, this is one of those things that just keeps, like, I think 2 or 3 times a year I ask, and I sort of never really know what happens. And we really do have a potential for a better partnership with the Board of Supervisors and better stewardship of our facilities, and frankly, creating a little bit more elbow room for our kids and our teachers.
I think we've always, I get your point, and I think it's certainly, there's some area for opportunity here. Particularly, I think it's been particularly challenging for us to address it in the way in which you desire for us to address it, which I understand. And that is because it's been handled differently in different places. But I do think the timing now is very good, because when we put in the budget, or I put in the budget, and hopefully you all support it, that we're going to have every class in this system below 30. We're going to need every bit of available space, and we'll need to walk buildings. We will need every one of our regional assistant superintendents to begin walking buildings with principals to see how every bit of space is being used. So I think the timing is really ideal for us to be better able to answer that question.
And then the second question that I had was around the conversations that we had last summer and last fall about right-sizing schools and kind of trying to buy back down the overall size of schools. I'm not sure, is that reflected in this? No. I didn't think so.
The standard, we had a number of in fact, I don't know how many work sessions we had last year on CIP, a bunch of them, almost one a month, it seemed like. And one of those conversations Mrs. Solch is referring to is we looked at our standard with regard to capacity, kind of minimums and maximums at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. We actually added some suggested language on how making it a little bit more, not so definitive, but a little bit more like a range. And I think everyone agreed upon that, and I think that's what we reflected in the CIP. At that time, and I understood it, but at the time, there were a few board members that wanted us to lower the standard. And I think the reason we have been unable to do that is for the obvious, because if we lowered the standard and made our school standard smaller, we would have to have a lot more money than we even have now. We already have a lot of strain on the system. Certainly, I think we all agreed upon what was discussed at that time, but if I recall correctly, the board decided we could not move forward with that just because of the cost.
The reason I bring that up is if we're going to discuss, because I think we have some responsibility, if nothing else, to create white papers on what the long-term strategies are, how we're going to plan for growth, how we're going to exit trailers, how we would ideally lower what I call the Costco supersize, schools. If we were going to lower it, what would that take? What would that look like? And part of the reason I bring it up is, poor Dr. Lip comes looking for, special services space, and there isn't any, I will tell you, in Region 4. Not specifically in my district, but in Region 4. And she, says, you are like elbow to elbow. And I'm like, well, the reason there's no room for special services for autism programs or hearing impaired programs or anything else in a lot of the schools is because they're up to, it's like when you get that hot cup of coffee from Starbucks and you really want to put in cream, but there's no room for the cream or no room for the amount of cream that you want to put without creating overspill. Well, we're in the same situation. And whereas if we buy down some of the size of some of those schools and distribute across, make wise use of these SAC rooms, et cetera, at least have a plan, then we have some elbow room to create special ed places that are closer to where children are. Then we're not transporting them as long. If we're not transporting them as long, we don't need as many buses, or we can be better efficient with our bus routes, and so on. This is a thread that, it's all attached, but until we start identifying and documenting some of these things and saying, hey, well, listen, we're gonna have to haul a kid from here clear over to here because this is the only place where we have to put this specialty program because none of the surrounding schools have the space. Well, now you're impacting all kinds of other things. Right, Mr. Sneed? Because you sounded like a politician when you gave that answer earlier.
Well, I wasn't, no, I have no desire to be a politician. I think Dr. Garza, not that I don't admire all of you guys, but Dr. Garza is correct. We just do not have sufficient funding to buy new sites and build buildings. I mean, this is what's happened over the past 30 years and the schools got bigger because that's all we could afford.
But I want to be really clear about something. I've been doing this a long time. I've even closed schools. There is no science to what's the perfect number. And we had this conversation before. So I want to be clear that people that might be watching this think that because some schools are large, that's a bad thing. In fact, if you read the research literature and look at some of the highest performing schools in the country, sometimes are the larger ones. Sometimes are small. There's no rhyme and reason to it. It's less about the size and the brick and mortar. It's more about the leadership and the talent and the dedication and what's going on in the building.
I'm not denying that you can't have an exceptional large school, but we didn't plan for large schools. We fell into large schools because we didn't have the money and the resources from the Board of Supervisors via capital means in order to effectively address student growth. And so I think the time has come, we're at that nexus to say, okay, you know what? We didn't create these, we didn't set out to do these schools. In fact, we changed the standard over and over and over again over time. And we've had the discussion that if things were optimal, we would make some changes, but we can't afford to make the changes. Well, if we don't ever address how you get to some of the optimal outcomes, just like you come to optimal outcomes with student achievement, if you don't address how you're going to get there, we're never going to be able to have that conversation with the Board of Supervisors over what's a better or more fair distribution of the capital monies.
I think that's what Mr. Moon was talking about in the first thing is, you know, that was his point. So do you have any more questions?
Nope.
All right. Ms. Strauss, followed by Ms. Palchik.
Thank you. A couple of questions. First, Dr. Garza, and the rollout of the Cooper AAP Center issue. I'm assuming that we don't have to adjust the CIP because it will be declared a center in the fall, and then because we've given the community two options, option 1, option 2, and what we're hearing is that option 2 is the preferred option. So I am assuming that the rollout and the final decision will come in time for kids to choose classes for next year.
Our plan is that the recommendation will come to you all in February, which is just next month.
Right.
And then the board can determine whether or not that's something you all can support for the next school year, depending upon what that feedback. We still have one survey, and we haven't gotten all that feedback back. So we'll have to see, but you all will make that decision in February.
Right. So, okay. So
Now,
this will
the CIP, you know, we have to make a decision on the CIP at a point in time.
Exactly.
And things evolve, and I think we have language in here that refers to the fact that this is a planning document, and it's evolving, and every year, based upon individual decisions, we have to update it. And so, assuming the decision's approved in February, the next iteration of the CIP would reflect that decision.
Okay.
And there are other examples that have to, you know, it's you have a plan, but there are other things that kind of moving parts throughout the school year.
Right. But in other words, a decision in February will come in time because they are beginning to sign up for courses, and parents need to know what the instructional plan is. Okay. Going back and always trying to figure out projections, what we're actually going to see in September is always difficult because parents make their own decisions. How well are we able to take a look at regional shifting of populations, and particularly where we know the kindergarten classes did not materialize in some of the schools? We had other schools where they materialized more than what we thought, and they continue to. So do we have any way of tracking as populations move, and particularly if they move at the last minute, and we don't know about it until September? How do we relate to Prince William, to Loudoun, to somewhere else? I know I've asked this question before, but it continues to be frustrating.
Right. I spoke with my colleagues over in an adjacent school division at Loudoun, and they still have significant growth, over 2,000 students. In fact, one of the things, you are correct, one of the things that we did report out was we said we had a number of variables that were occurring, and one of them was our birth to kindergarten ratio, right? We said that the number of students that, in other words, should be or that were born in Fairfax County versus the number of students attending when they age up to the point of being kindergarten was less than we have seen historically. We also had a little bit of a conundrum with the change in the migration patterns. The number of students during the school year, students come and go within the school division, any school division, and they call those migration patterns. And in the past, we had been making up a lot of our enrollment projections during that time. Specifically, we'd have more students coming in than were going out for whatever reason. Parents move, pick one, job loss, gains, what have you. We are also seeing a change in that to the effect that it's greatly been diminished and significantly. And then, to your point about finding out what the reasons are for those migration patterns, it's very challenging at best. I'm not aware that there is, in fact, a way to determine that. Mr. Sneed and his staff and Ms. Holleb and even our discussions with FPAC and the fine work they've done, when we've talked to them about what we're looking at different types of trends and trend data. We try to triangulate that data to see if there are any indicators that might identify some kind of reason or purpose. In fact, I think Mr. Sneed, and he could probably talk a little more to this, has reached out with the real estate community to try and develop further the relationship there. To not only see, okay, if there's ethnicity and ethnic trending that is going on that can begin to paint a little bit of a picture then maybe we can go ahead and get data sources from another component to find out exactly if there's something else going on. But to that extent, we've seen some rather interesting results with the different type of ethnic groups and their migration patterns. And I'm talking about all migrations and all ethnicities. But I don't know that there's any one clear picture that I could say that we've seen. Ms. Sneed, is there something that you think there's been in terms of anything that can tell us, to your point, I don't believe that there exists on the migration pattern? End of story. Not yet.
Right.
Yeah,
'Cause
we can see students who move within the system. If they're
Right.
from one school to another, we can see new students because we identify them by, that we use their student ID number from year to year. And we can also see students, we know which students have left. But you don't really know where they wind up necessarily. I mean, once they're here, they're not registered anymore. They're difficult to track. And as Jeff said, we're starting. Right now, we're in the new projection cycle, which will be finished hopefully in March. But and then the planning team we're looking at a bunch of different things to help us with projections. One of the most important is trying to use the county IPLS data, which is real estate, to help us with projections. But it's a lot of data, so we're just trying to get it together.
Because I guess the one question I have, I know we still have PIMIT in here as at some point renovating, expanding and opening, and trying to figure out when, and because the community is asking me when, because obviously it's the one corner where it's very frustrating. We don't understand what choices people are making and are going to make. It's their choice.
I heard from, I think it was through FPAC one meeting, it would be helpful if the state would have a statewide system.
Yes, that was my next question. Statewide
Yeah.
tracking a student number. Then we
Right.
would at
Then
least
we would know where the students are migrating in and out of which jurisdiction. But until we have something that is more region or statewide, it really is just our information and seeking out information from other districts.
Right, because building schools, adding on to schools is expensive, and you don't want to miss the mark after you've allocated the money one way or another.
All right, Ms. Palchak, followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, hi. So number one, thank you for this report, for the work in it. I do want to reiterate Ms. Evans and Mr. Press's concern for Falls Church High School. Hope we can continue that conversation. I have a question, and I guess your answer to Ms. Strauss's question goes along with that. Is a lot about timing and alternate plans. I know we have a few schools in here where it's not construction, but shifting AAP programs, reopening old school sites like at Graham Road and Jackson, having Thoreau open the AAP program. So I'm just, as a new board member, trying to get a better sense of when we have more concrete answers as to timeline for that, timeline for the communication of, and is this the only option for each of those, or are there alternate options on the table? And then let me give you the third one, and you can answer, is going back to the eco schools, which I attended their great conference last year, and our work with the county on that. Just want to see, I know stormwater management has quite a few projects in our schools with bioretention and everything else. In my personal work, sometimes seeing how we work together in collaboration and using resources and planning time collaboratively, just want to get a better sense of how we do that and what our plans are.
Okay, I'd be glad to do that. In fact, I'm going to refer to Mr. Sneed to add some specific details about the cooperation, the partnership with the county, because I don't want to miss anything with that, because staff to staff, we have amazing relationships, and we are doing an incredible job of working together on the bioretention program. And if you could add more to that in a minute. But one of the things that you mentioned when you asked the questions about the CIP and programming, when I look at the CIP document, we try to reflect all the programming adjustments and changes. And I know you had the Instructional Services Department speaking before we did today in the work session. Part of their lane, if you will, is really the identification of the AAP programs and where they go. I know that there has been previous discussion in front of the school board about AAP programming at the elementary school and at the middle school. There's been presentations that have been provided by external folks, our partnership with George Mason University about different programs. So that programming piece really is something that is outside of, it's correlated to facilities, but it's really outside of what we do in terms of our presentation piece of it. And I'd have to defer to Mr. Presidio and his team regarding any programming and where that kind of comes and how it leads up to. We do identify and coordinate with them about places like Cooper, where you'll see in their documentation, and they'll talk about their 300 students that currently don't attend Cooper. Cooper's been growing their program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm knowledgeable and I'm familiar with that because I've been in the meetings that they've been talking about, and also we do student projections. So to your point, it is kind of all commingled together. But the programming and the programming determinations and decisions, while we may advise to them as to what we see in terms of where there's capacity, where there may not be capacity, where would be the most appropriate, where the students may reside that would be attending, that would qualify for some of the different programs that they might have, that really is where our role is in terms of facilities. It's almost as if you will advise and consent. Now, we've been a little more vocal and vociferous because a lot of the programs that we have created with all good intentions by our forefathers and mothers, if you will, really have grown to a point where we've had to then break it down and have those conversations across these different lanes and to break down these individual stovepipe structures to make sure that we're all talking, because it does affect the physical plan. It does affect, as was mentioned, the transportation. So really what we try to reflect in here is what ISD's program requirements may be, what the conversations have been at other work sessions about where programs would need to go. There are regulations, I think it's 33.2, which talks to AAP programs, and that regulation speaks to things that do affect the physical plant and capacity, and says the school board will look at, or does have the authority, so I forget the exact language, to review schools or programs where there is overcrowding and to create them and so forth. But our program, the CIP document, just reflects what those conversations are in terms of programming, because we in facilities don't directly recommend or really kind of impact it other than from that supportive standpoint.
So I can answer a couple of your questions specifically. One, you asked about Luther Jackson. And in fact, Amy Holla, where's Amy? We didn't acknowledge Amy in the back there. She's Assistant Director of Planning. We met with the principal and the Regional Assistant Superintendent the other day to discuss Jackson. We've heard for a number of years, and this is the advantage you have. You're the Providence school board member, so you have both Oakton and Falls Church, which is great, because we have a number of kids who are Oakton high school students who actually drive past Thoreau, and we've heard from those parents. So the proposal, I think, that we were looking at for Thoreau was not to affect the AAP Center, but just base school students. So and Jackson has an increase in enrollment. They look like they're going to hit a little over, they're going to be 1,600 kids, which is pretty big for a middle school. And Thoreau will have about 300 or 400 seats at the end of the renovation. So I think that's what we were looking at. Not definitively, but that was the idea. Graham Road, we're definitely interested. We've done a lot of work there. The new Graham Road is right at capacity, but you have a number of other schools that are fairly close by that have some capacity concerns, most specifically Pine Spring. I think they have somewhere 15 or 16 trailers. So I think that obviously that has to be on the radar. But Thoreau, I think that we're looking at next year, at least to have some discussions around that. You also brought up the issue and the partnership that we have with the county regarding stormwater management. So for a number of years, this is related to, this came through the state, but it has to do with the Chesapeake Bay Act. Is that if you take, for example, a county like Fairfax, we all know that we're fairly well built out, and there's no way for the county to really be in compliance with either what they call the quality of the water. So when Jeff talks about things like Filterra that cleans the water, or the quantity, that's the speed in which the water leaves the site and hits our stream bed. So the county had been searching for a way to come into compliance, and the only way to really do that was to use our site, since we're really the biggest landowner in the county. So what they've done in order to save money, this is our suggestion, is, and they have a significant amount of money, is when we renovate or construct a new school, we design and construct and implement the stormwater modification on our site on behalf of the county. And there's a number of these.
It's pretty considerable. And then the last part of your question is found on page 41, where it talks about potential future boundary adjustments, which not only mentions program, but also capacity issues.
It sounds like, I apologize, I missed the question, but it sounds like some of that was AAP centers. We have to, there's just really so many we can take at a time, because there has to be a capacity. There's a checklist with regard to readiness. So we will be addressing some of those others that have been, that need to be addressed. I think you raised a couple of those, but just kind of in due time. I think right now the only one that we're even looking at for next year would be Cooper, and then certainly we'll have a larger plan to address some of the other.
Thank you. Page 41 does have some of them, I agree, but there are a few that are missing, so thank you.
Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Huff.
First question I have is on this page 28 of the updated report, where it says the 10-year CIP forecast. And I'm asking a couple of questions, trying to understand where we might find some solutions for Falls Church High School. Starting my second term on the board, and so this means it's going to be my 5th year joining many colleagues talking about finding a solution. So I was wondering, it mentions the Eastern High School addition, and since that's not, doesn't pertain to Braddock District, could you explain to me a little bit more what that is?
All right. So I think that there's 3 high schools that are going to require an addition. I don't know which will be the most urgent. I suspect that will be West Potomac High School. That's in the eastern part of the county. There's also Stewart High School and McLean High School. So some of those have potential boundary solutions that could negate that requirement. But I just felt that it was necessary that I can't be certain that there's going to be a solution. I have to have some type of placeholder in there to provide capacity relief. I mean, that's why West Potomac, I think right now, if the current trends hold, are going to be pushing around 2,900 kids in about 5 years.
So this is very helpful, because I was looking at several of those projections. And I want to preface by saying, Dr. Garza, I appreciate you noting with regard to Cooper, it applies to all of this. This is a planning document. Nothing is signed in blood and stone, and we have to be nimble to respond to the needs of the school system. Obviously, we want to honor the queue as best as we can, but there are going to be times when we've got to do what's in the best interest of students. So, Mr. Sneed, I was noticing that about West Potomac and Mount Vernon. And the bottom line is Mount Vernon is looking at 82% capacity at about the time that West Potomac's going to be, at 130. So, and then Stewart, I was noticing the same thing. They're going to be up at close to 120, but Annandale's at 86. So I'm asking about that money because I looked at it and it's 4 years. It's 1 year that I could see on the bar chart where you're looking at the planning to permit to construction. And we looked at Herndon High School schedule. It's 5 years from permit to construction. So in my mind, working with Dr. Garza and, the school board members who represent Falls Church and the community, I'd like to see us start to say, okay, I know Mr. Sneed needs to put money in, as sort of a holdover, but the bottom line is we've got a legacy high school that was built in 1964. And so it's, in my mind, where if we can say we've got vacancy spaces and we can look at some boundary solutions for the other schools, why are we building an addition at West Potomac when Mount Vernon's down to 82%? Why are we building an addition at Stewart when Annandale's at 86%? I mean, those are the things where I think we could, just like we did with West Springfield High School, where there's a will, there's a way. Even if you bump them up a year or two, we can finally do right by our final legacy high school. And so,
May I ask a question about that? As Ms. McLaughlin pointed out, this plan is nuanced because in some places it anticipates that should nothing be done or changed into the future, this is where we're going to have a challenge.
Right.
West Potomac being the perfect example of that, right? That assumes you're saying if nothing changes, we're going to have a problem with this high school and we're going to have to add capacity. Is that correct?
All things being equal, yes.
But we also reference the fact that we know we're going to have to redraw some boundaries in Region 3.
Right.
And in some cases, we're probably going to have to look at the high school feeder, Hayfield, West Potomac, and Mount Vernon specifically. So it's kind of like you almost have to it's like various realities and that are reflected here. So the West Potomac's assuming nothing changes, but we know that we're going to have to look at some potential boundary. And if the potential boundary changes get made by policy, we would have shifting down the road potentially some dollars. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
No, you're correct. And
Okay.
in addition, when you take a look at this, and that was part of the work sessions that we've had about, and really the passion that's been articulated about Falls Church, is that at the end of the day, what we looked at was anything that we changed or modified usually ended up impacting some other part of this. It was like pushing on one end of a balloon. I think somebody used the analogy where you push on one end and the other end sticks out. And that's when I finally had that light bulb moment that what we do is we have needs that are greater than our resources. We've taken a look at these resources and we've looked at possible opportunities. The stars haven't aligned to say, well, you've got enough capacity out everywhere, including SAC, to go ahead and address in the locations that you have, that even with boundary adjustments. Now, we haven't gone to that level of granularity of total boundary adjustments, and I think people talked about a nuclear option, and that created a whole lot of conversation to the point where, what had ended up happening is we realized, they're in the next bond referendum. They're in the next bond. Falls Church High School is in the next bond referendum for design. We don't like where it is. We're trying to enhance and improve it as much as we can, which really is the common thread with what you're suggesting. What else can we look at? What else can we do? I'm not sure that there is something else that we can do, given this framework that we have, and I don't know that it would come up with enough. I'm certainly open to investigating.
when I look at that chart that's behind you, I thought it was showing that Falls Church. I thought Falls Church was showing the 2019 bond.
It's 17 for design.
Okay, so
And here again, remember what we say about the 155 million cap. The 17 of design is keeping in mind all of the other projects that preceded it. So when you look at the queue and you look at the confines of the financing construct of the queue, that's what therein lies the biggest rub of the 274 versus the 155. And the fact that we have middle schools like Thoreau, the fact that we have high schools like Oakton, like West Springfield, like Herndon, which are big ticket items, like Falls Church, big ticket items, it really is trying to fit 10 pounds into a 5-pound bag.
I do want to make sure I'm looking at this correctly. In this chart, it's the first yellow bar for Falls Church High School saying FY 2019 bond. For planning,
I actually have it, well,
because there's no bar for design.
yeah, the yellow is designed.
Well, that's showing 2019 on the chart.
Yeah, oh. I'll double check what is it? I have to look at the cash flow. I think I actually have it preceding that.
They're correct. It's showing 2019 bond
Yeah.
for planning. So if
Yeah,
that's
but actually, yeah, so if you see FY19, the 2019 bond actually falls in FY20. So the funding starts in the 17 bond.
Okay. Well, that is sort of the first thing that is not what I was seeing. So that's why I'm looking at 2019 and thinking that's just unacceptable to start that late. But I'm still going to advocate for Ms. Palchuk and Ms. Evans because the Falls Church is your school and I'm just little old Braddock district. But I think that it is high time that we start looking at some solutions. And I would struggle to say, why are we holding money, valuable money, for an Eastern High School edition when we know we've got capacity at the other schools? So for the short term even, if some boundary changes to fill those empty seats first, and then you build your additions after that, why aren't we leading with doing the boundary adjustments to those schools? So I'm just gonna lay that on the table. I think honestly, this board has spent a significant amount of dialogue along with Dr. Garza's administration and her administration that preceded her on how to find a solution to Falls Church. Having been a veteran in the trenches when Woodson kept getting dropped off and pushed aside and all that stuff, I think it's worth everybody doing their best efforts to say, let's look for possible solutions and not, it is what it is. That's all. So thank you both, Mr. Plattenberg and Mr. Sneed. I know you guys are very committed. My remarks aren't to say you're not. I'm just saying maybe we need to look at the problem with a fresh perspective.
And I think it's important to point out that we don't have the authority just to shift gears and go a different direction with regard to the funding. And so that's why we've had a number of discussions, work sessions on this particular issue alone, like the ranking. Remember, it's not like we've ignored it. It's not like this board has ignored it. There have been numerous, even since just in this last year, numerous work sessions trying to figure out how do we accelerate to meet these needs. And we didn't get to consensus with regard to what the board wanted to do.
Well, so,
correct?
I mean, Dr. Garza, but it's going back to the point you made, which is it's a planning document, and if this board decides
Yes.
that it wants to change it, it can.
That's my point.
So to the two district members who represent Falls Church, I'm just telling you, I'm one single board member, that if you want to put your heads together with Dr. Garza's administration, come up with some ideas and bring it back to the board, it's still worthwhile doing it. For what it's worth. So, Dr. Garza, I think we're on the same page. Yeah, we're on the same page, but I'm also, that is a 2008 ranking. It is now 2016. So this is a different board, different mindset, and I think, with Falls Church, it's our last legacy high school. Anyway, so back to Braddock District. Just quick question. I noticed that you mentioned in the planning document that Woodson High School and Wakefield Forest Elementary both show that they're going to have some notable overcrowding that would be addressed by modular additions. But I was asked by the community, is there any detail behind that in terms of by 2021, it's showing the projections but overcrowding. But then if you look more closely, both schools are kind of hitting that crowding by school year 2017. So are these modular additions not going to show up till 5 years from now, or are you thinking they're going to come sooner? And what's the best way to tell the community what this all means?
Well, not to confound your prior conversation about Falls Church, but Wakefield Forest renovation is actually in that mix there. So I would keep that in mind when you look at the queue. That being said, yeah, Woodson concerns us quite a bit. Obviously, the first step before you invest capital money, as Jeff said, that we hope the trailers are temporary. But even if you were to have to build an addition or bring in a modular at Woodson, the first step would be just to use trailers before you allocate the capital money. So it certainly looks like Woodson is on its way to becoming overcrowded, and we're going to have a solution for Woodson. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. So there's no short-term sense of when, and because in 2 years, actually a year and a half from now, because it's school year 15 that we're in right now, by school year 17, a year and a half from now, Woodson's numbers are going to be where they're then projected at 2021. It's a weird dip, like it goes up and then it kind of dips
Right.
down and then goes back up again. So,
we have this summer, we're converting one of the business labs to a science lab. Our capacity architects are in the room taking notes, and they're going to work also with the principal to maximize space within the school, which is what we do everywhere. So that's the first challenge
Okay.
that you have. It's going to be science labs, and in fact, we're in Jackson. We're looking at new labs for Jackson, and we're looking at new labs for Stewart. So
I'm really sensitive to some of our other high schools. I mean, Centerville and West Potomac projections to me are the most concerning. I mean, 106 for Woodson is not awful, but I know people are starting to ask because it is a school that was always known for being on the smaller side, and its numbers are really going up, and that's because Dr. Garza's predecessor had 2 boundary changes occur that, honestly, I'm a little worried that the projections on what they thought it would do to Woodson's numbers are different than what we now have.
Well, I don't disagree with that. And normally what you see when schools are under capacity and they start to grow, that's the biggest struggle as they grow to full capacity and how to use the building efficiently.
And having toured Fairfax High School when they were overcrowded at up to 120%, it is noticeable when you reach that number. I mean, now you're crammed in there like, sardines trying to move through the hallways. And my Annandale High School teachers on a cart, teaching classrooms, not ideal. Kids don't even know how to go find their teacher and returns, and it's a nightmare. So I appreciate you guys, the hard work you're doing to try and monitor 196 or 198? 96 schools?
Yeah, I've lost count over the time.
197. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of schools to keep following. And then just back to Annandale real quickly. I mean, I do hope that working with Ms. Evans and myself, looking at Annandale's numbers, and you look at the overcrowding that's happening at Stewart, that we're going to try and not let Stewart struggle from overcrowding that we just know doesn't help in instructional success when it gets to be that high of a number. So that's on my radar. And then I will work with you gentlemen on the small little boundary shifts. I forgot what they call administrative boundary changes. Boundary light. These are so light, they're not even worth discussing, but you know of them. They're just tiny little weird islands that make no sense that maybe we can try and clean up. So I would just ask this, what's the timeline in general if we're doing sort of administrative change? I mean, you've already wanted to, what's the optimal time frame that it comes to the table? You guys say we'll bring it to the community where it's an administrative.
I would say for all those, it depends. I will tell you, when people are asking me about administrative, whether it's light or whatever it is, that we've got such major Region 3 changes that I'm telling folks, there's just so much capacity we have as a team to manage some of those.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be limited in how much we can do just because we have so many schools in Region 3 that we're going to have to
Correct, and address. Sure, no problem.
We need to get it on our list. We need to have it on our radar.
Good.
But we're a little bit limited, I think, this spring.
I completely understand. So, all right, those are my questions for now. And again, Ms. Palchuk and Ms. Evans, you got another person in your corner. Let's try and find some solutions.
Ms. Huff and then Ms. Hines.
Thank you. My questions might end up being redundant because I feel like for me, it's probably more of an education. So if it would be better for me to sit down with you guys separately, stop me and let me know. Okay. I was looking at Region 1 and noticing for 2020-21, in Region 1, there's a projected balance of 2,000 students. And with that, there is a recommendation or a consideration of building a new elementary school in that region. So not advocating for or against it, more just want to understand how that ends up working when you're looking at whether you would build a new school or how you reallocate students to 1/3. Really, if you look at it, 2/3 of that region have less than 100% capacity projection.
Well, we've had really, if you take a look at and I'll let Mr. Nee go into further detail, but one of the things that we've talked about, one of the things that we spoke of was we were addressing the capacity issues with, for example, Woodlawn, when we went ahead and did the addition as a part of the renovation and the queue. And then outside of our CIP, or capital improvement plan process, we had two things that happened. One of them was Bucknell Elementary School, where we decided in our conversation in Region 1, I'm giving examples of the changes, and I was but one of the things was we had a couple of things that occurred in that, and my whole purpose of bringing that up, really to Ms. Corbett Sanders' point is that due to changes that actually occur after the CIP happens and where those needs are in relation to where we're addressing them, right, that creates the opportunity that the CIP program guide in each of the summaries mentions possible options, right? The idea is to get them out there and to get the conversations going. We have found in the past that some of staff's possible options got quite spirited response from community members, and we learned quite well that some of those weren't as palatable as the administration, as staff thought, at least identifying them. And specifically, I'll let Kevin go through some of the examples that you mentioned in your region.
So you asked about Region 1, and I think you're referring to the Fairfax Oakton Elementary School. And I don't necessarily, I understand the purpose of the regions, but when we look at capacity, we typically look at it from a pyramid perspective. In the particular case of Fairfax Oakton Elementary, this is linked into the fact that you have a number of, these are Oakton high school students at the elementary level who actually attend AAP centers primarily at Hunters Woods, but some at Sunrise Valley. So one of the issues at the Oakton elementary schools, or the Oakton High School pyramid elementary schools, are all very crowded. So this school has been on the radar for a number of years. The subsequent effect is we had something unique happen in South Lakes. We had, at the elementary level, we had an out-migration of students this year, which was a little bit unusual. We're not exactly sure what happened, but we do know as the Silver Line develops that they're going to need capacity in South Lakes eventually. Right now, with surplus capacity, that will just forestall a requirement for my successors, somebody down the road, to have to build an elementary school there. So part of the reason that you see that, it's linked to the Oakton High School pyramid, if that makes sense. Okay.
Thank you.
But I'm happy to have you come in and sit down with us.
I probably
and
should.
Yeah,
discuss
that'd be great. And the policy that was referenced was 8130.7 that articulates the boundary light and the administrative boundary and all the different boundary adjustments.
That does make it complicated because to some extent the regions, you'll have some crossover, with regard to pyramids. The other thing that, just to note, we'll have sometimes an elementary school or a new school in a plan. I think the high school is a perfect example, where we keep pushing it out because before we start the building and constructing of a new school, we first of all have to definitively know we need it. And so even though it may be in the plan, we potentially sometimes will keep pushing it out if in fact it doesn't materialize that we need it, or if there's some other more cost-effective way for us to address it. Isn't that correct? Shake your head if that's correct. Always want to make sure.
All right, we have Ms. Hines, followed by Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Okay, just to follow up on that a little bit, I think is it fair to say that if we could do boundary changes more quickly or move programs more quickly than we do, we wouldn't have a lot of these issues, right? But reality is that we don't, for example, Mr. Plattenberg, in Loudoun County, as I understand it, if I move into a school, into a neighborhood, and 2 blocks away is the school that I should go to, but that school is full, my child will actually be bused to a different school. So every year, it's almost like you start over whether or not you're actually allowed to go to the school that's in your neighborhood out there.
Correct. It's called an overflow situation that they have. And
Right.
sometimes, in some instances, some families that have been there through the student's elementary period have been rezoned 3 different times. That's how chaotic it is.
It is
Because of the
chaotic.
growth.
Yeah, it is. I know. So there are different ways to skin the cat, right? But the way we do it, our families expect to be able to go to the school that they moved into that neighborhood for. And so that makes boundary shifts extremely sticky and resource intensive, which is why we end up having these quicker fixes, right? Which is the outdoor classrooms and, just like too many kids here, too few kids here, and we live with that for a while because we're not light on our feet when it comes to moving kids around, I think. A couple of questions. First of all, I want to thank you, Mr. Plattenberg. We had a good conversation recently about the feasibility study for solar alternative energy, and I appreciate that you have gone ahead and we're participating in at least a feasibility study to see whether it would work for us to have a pilot with solar panels on some of our schools. I know that's important to several of my advocates and people and students as well. So we're going to get a report on that feasibility study at some point, or? Okay, thank you. All right, I appreciate it. On Thoreau, I would just say, to follow up on Ms. Palchik, it was 2 years ago, I think, that, or maybe more, that we voted down the idea of putting the AAP Center at Thoreau, moving those kids from Luther Jackson to Thoreau. That was voted down by my fellow board members, and I was somewhat disappointed. And, the folks who live, the families there have kind of been hanging fire already for a couple of years on moving that center back to Thoreau. My own general sense is that unless there's some compelling reason, I don't understand why we have middle school AAP centers, because in my opinion, a middle school is a center. You're already serving several elementary schools. Now, there may be parts of the county where there is a compelling reason to have a middle school center. I won't speak for other parts of the county. But in this case, I guess all I'm saying is I would like, if we're going to go ahead and talk about Thoreau boundaries in a couple of years, I'd like us to also talk about the AAP Center as part of that boundary conversation. So have we decided that we're not going to add that, or are we still thinking about it?
Whatever the body wishes, we'll be happy to implement or provide, really. I mean,
Okay.
We're pretty open.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I know I saw that the boundary was in there, but it was somewhat, I wasn't sure what exactly we were going to be talking about. Okay. My only other question, and I've lost my notes on this, so I'm sorry if I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, but I think the last time we talked about the CIP, somebody mentioned that the county gets a certain amount of extra money, and they keep it even though it's based on our bonds. Something like $30 million, and I wish I remembered what it was.
I believe it related to the bond premiums, and maybe we could touch on that when Kristen's up here doing the budget work session, because I'm not sure if we have received the response from the county yet.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Corbett Sanders, and then I have some go-backs, and I will remind my friends who have go-backs that we are now we continue to be half an hour behind.
I will make this very quick. First, thank you, gentlemen, for all of your hard work on the CIP this year. It is certainly reflective of the painful discussions that the school board members and the community and the staff went through last year. So thank you. Job well done. I wanted to express encouragement of Mr. Moon and Ms. Schultz request for a review of how we use trailers in learning cottages. I think that would be a productive report to have, and to have some sort of guidance on not only the introduction of them, but the retirement of them. Secondly, I would also like to tell you how much I appreciate the work you all are doing on the geocoding and the GIS system that you've introduced for supporting the facilities management and planning. I do request that perhaps we get a better understanding of how that system works and how it compares to the old way of making student projections. And then I would also encourage that I know that as part of the strategic plan, we're going to hear something about early childhood education and the need for preschool. And when we get that, it would be helpful to also have an understanding of what the impact on our facilities would be to have that introduced at a minimum in all of our higher needs population schools, but obviously broader than that. I very much appreciate some of the discussion we've been having about boundaries and programs. Obviously, that's something that is really important to keep in mind as we look at the CIP. I would urge that, and thank you, Dr. Garza, for mentioning the complexity of Region 3, because there is quite a bit going on in Region 3 that may need, require us to have a much more a more innovative approach to how we do boundaries and programming discussions, and not restricted to just a pyramid, but to look at it on a broader level. But that's something that is a work in progress. So I would encourage my colleague from Burke to have a little patience with any discussion about anything that we do to West Potomac High School, because it's part of a broader discussion amongst the other schools in that area. And so I know that the county's working on putting together some recommendations there.
All right, so we have go backs. We have, starting with Ms. Schultz.
Just a couple quick things. One, in areas that we're heavily oversubscribed or going to be, could we anticipate almost like a not an open boundary, but for kids who wanted to transfer to another school, you know, who wanted a pupil place, like a marketing campaign? Hey, if you want to go to a less crowded school, you know, there's the door. I mean, not that we want them to leave school, but, you know, like, I mean, almost like an advertising campaign that if they're in a really crowded school, it's like, hey, listen, there's elbow room at other schools. If you want a pupil place, there's opportunity.
Well, I mean, there's 6,000 kids every year that are transferring by the transfer reg already. And they're not eligible to transfer into schools that are overcrowded, only schools that are undercrowded.
But are they transferring because they figure it out, or because that school has a program that they want, or? But what I'm talking about is specifically around creating a, you know, an awareness campaign around, hey, listen, there's, you know, you want to maybe potentially have smaller classes or a smaller school, there's other opportunities, you know.
So if we did that, we wouldn't get mad at my planning office for being inaccurate on a school-by-school basis if we were to open that.
Free-range school boarding.
I think that has often been done across the country, where you have a school that's under-enrolled. You put in an innovative program. That's how magnet programs came to be, because that's how you draw people into schools, and you know, use capacity. It does make it complex, and not a lot of large, fast-growing schools have done that, because it's harder to manage your growth. The more, you know, variation you invite in your system, the harder it is to manage. But I certainly think that's could be contemplated in some schools that are maybe under-enrolled, as we look at some schools like Bucknell and some others where we need to draw in more students. We can certainly keep that in mind.
Because, you know, there's school districts that have open boundaries, I've heard.
Heard that too, but
Are you done?
No, so that would be, I think that would be beneficial for us to keep in our back pocket, because that would, it would almost be like a self, you know, I mean, there may be other things in terms of tracking, but if we're able to ease the burden some places just by mere advertising of programs and awareness and opportunity, that's one. And then also, I haven't heard, I was waiting for somebody to talk about underutilized and unused facilities. Are we bringing that back into our, other than it's simply appearing in the CIP? You know, especially with Dr. Garza's mention about bringing class size down, we're going to have to maximize our efficiency.
Yeah, it basically is one of our fundamental foundation tenets that we've talked about the repurposing of existing facilities as appropriate. I mean, it's pretty much, I think, a standard part of our initiatives. So
I think too, some are maybe more pressing than others. I know there's
Right.
certain ones that we could ask any school board member, and you might have an opinion on any of them, on certain ones of them. But there are some that are very clearly in the upcoming plan, just because we have real pressing needs in those areas, like Pemmit, right over here, Dunloring. Some of those are in the foreseeable future, and Graham Road's another one because we have overcrowding in the area. And it's much cheaper to bring an existing facility that is being used for something else back online as a school.
But I'm going to highlight that a pressing need can be defined differently. You know, pressing is not just space. There's lots of pressing. And so pressing may be, you know, art on a cart and 5 lunches and such and such. I mean, pressing has a different definition based on where you are in this district, and it doesn't make it less pressing because it's a different kind of pressing.
And that is, I mean, that is reflected in, as I mentioned, that policy 3333.2. I mean, it does talk in the case of AAP pressing, if you will, about overcrowding. So there are a number of elements where we have throughout and examples where we've had.
Ms. Evans for a go back.
Thank you. And I appreciate Ms. McLaughlin raising the cash flow issue. I had mentioned this too, so I just wanted to clarify. Isn't that going to require a correction, Mr. Sneed, on that cash flow chart to show?
Just looked at it, it is an FY. So remember, the 2019 bond is in FY20.
I'm sorry, say that again? If you look at page 28.
But it wouldn't be, when I say it's in the 17 bond, is over 2.5 years. So if it's spending before the.
Right, but it's not showing it on the 17 bond. It's not, there's no bar
I
on the
haven't
17.
listed the items in there. Or go ahead.
Yes, there's actually a box missing with the shade. If you look at the dollar values, you could see that there is a small planning money expenditures in FY 2019. So we'll make the correction on
We'll make the
page 20.
correction. Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Dr. Garza had mentioned that we'd had this discussion several times in the last during the last board, and so for the new board members, I would mention that yes, we at one point had made the decision to give precedence to schools that were named in the CIP that had the impact of raising Falls Church by about 10 or 11 spots. The board revisited that at a work session and went back to just going back to the 2008 Q. One of the things we could do that we've talked about is the possibility of reassessing those schools that are the 10 or 11 that are in there, and that's something that we probably should revisit. And one last thought, and I can follow up and give you some more details about what that would involve. On boundaries, Ms. McLaughlin raised that, and schools that are right next to each other that are over and under capacity, and I'm sympathetic to that, although when I first went on the board 6 years ago, we were in just this horrible crisis with Annandale High School, just horrible crisis with Annandale and Poe. And look at them now. You know, we had a year-long study. We had a a boundary change, and so we just have to be very careful. You know, we just have to be very careful of the true impact, and we probably should not have done what we did 5 years ago, at least in retrospect. So I just raised that Ms. Hines raised the fact that it takes so long to do it. By the time you've done it, things can have changed immeasurably. And I don't know what one does to be more nimble. They are painful, and people then move. You know, people also, people will sometimes move to get, we have to remember that people do vote with their feet sometimes. So.
I thank you for those comments, Ms. Evan, the last one, particularly in light of what may need to happen in Region 3, and, all for good reasons, but it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to predict, and as you said, you think you're being nimble, and then trending changes. So let's see, I have Ms. McLaughlin, and then followed by Ms. Palchik.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on something Ms. Schultz brought up, and then Ms. Palchuk and others. And it does have to do with program placement, and then what does that do in terms of sometimes our enrollment. And when I think about our AAP centers, as we are seeing, as more and more students are qualifying and receiving, level 4 center-based services, some of our center schools become center dominant. So you've got more kids that are center based at the school than actually those who are, community neighborhood based. And I think those are the things that I, again, appreciate Dr. Garza with instructional services in concert with Mr. Plattenberg's department. Then it becomes the musical chairs, and when are we reaching a threshold where, and so I plant the seed, Dr. Garza, we may need to have a conversation with the full board on, do we want to look at sort of a policy and practice that, do we want centers where you have more center kids than you have neighborhood school kids? Because what I hear from the community is, once the tipping point happens and you've got more center-based kids, the very neighborhood community whose school it is feel like outsiders. And the children tend to then get a lot of the, well, I'm gifted, oh, you're not gifted, and they're at their own neighborhood school. So there's a tipping point, and I think we have to be looking at what's that's doing. And I know it's more complicated than today's conversation, but just wanted to reinforce that you have my support that we need to be looking at a new model. And then the other thing is, it elevates up to the high school level. And so Ms. Corbett-Sanders, I'm absolutely happy to be very patient. It's not my dog in the fight. I don't represent that part of the district. I'm just looking at board level how we can start to be mindful of the CIP dollars that we have, and sharing with the superintendent's administration what solutions do we have on the table that don't always mean just building capacity one place while we have empty seats at another. But when I think about West Potomac and Mount Vernon, some of the things I've heard over time being on the board is the IB program, of which I have tremendous high regard for. It's a remarkable program, but it is not meant for every student. And it doesn't have some of the, in my mind, flexibilities for someone who might be more STEM oriented, that they wouldn't necessarily do full IB, but they might want to be having those options through the AP math and sciences and things. And so sometimes the AP program ends up being an attractive choice. Sometimes I think parents just decide which school is it they want to be at, and then they use the AP and the IB as the option to use as, well, I want to be pupil placed there. And so I think about for West Potomac, which is AP, and Mount Vernon, which is IB, is that contributing to also part of the outgoing population that pupil places over at West Potomac, and therefore contributes further to the overcrowding component. So having watched the boundary changes, I without question understand the sensitivities, and you don't want to rush to any quick decisions on that at all. I'm just saying, as we've got Mr. Sneed setting aside money for, modular additions, my point is that it's money that we could be using sooner rather than later to help one of our legacy high schools. And so if there's other solutions on the table, I just hope the board members can be working with the administration, and let's look at solutions that don't just build where we don't need to be building just yet.
Ms. Patrick?
I just want to reiterate that I think it's great to have a plan to get out of the temporary classrooms. And I love that you have in your report the fact that we are so much more urbanized and we have a need to plan for design and operate urban schools and to co-locate schools with other urban uses such as parks, libraries, or within urban residential commercial buildings. So just when that plan is put together, I hope we do incorporate using versus not using modulars and looking at new, urbanized, innovative ways, collaborating with the county as you do so well to look at those plans. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Clerk, if we are ready to see next steps from this session. We're just going to wait for next steps. Don't leave yet. Wait, you've got 1 second. I'll call on you. All right, questions or comments? I'll start with.
I have a couple here that I think we probably need to add. One was SAC rooms. What are the status? What's the status of the SAC rooms? And what's the long-term strategy?
Karen Corbett Sanders has a suggestion or a comment.
I think Dr. Garza is still
Dr.
something else, right?
I think in terms of the
I thought you were
major
done,
ones,
sorry.
I think I captured the rest of them.
All right.
Thank you for catching the SAC. That was one that I was going to offer. Additionally,
Yeah.
with the page 28, I think we want to actually specify that that is for Falls Church.
Right, to be on the 217 bond, yes.
Right, yes.
Thank
to
you.
reflect the 2017 bond schedule inclusion.
And to
of-
reference Falls
yeah,
Church.
Right. That was one. And then the only other topic that came up for discussion, and I don't know if this is a follow-up, regards relooking at the Q schedule. I know that Mrs. Evans mentioned it. I do know that that was looked at last year as well, so I don't know if we want to put this as a follow-up here or do it somewhere else.
My suggestion, because it doesn't affect this document necessarily in your adoption of this document. I simply understand that it may be something the board wants to discuss, because I think you have to take this up for adoption on what date? Coming up, right? So I would think through chairman's, we could schedule a follow-up work session, or through a forum topic. It's up to the chair and vice chair. Wouldn't you agree that that would be appropriate?
I think that would be appropriate, yeah. So I don't know if that needs to be reflected that we're going to do that, or if we just do it.
I think we just do it. I don't think it may be appropriate necessarily for this consideration of this document as a follow-up.
You're right, Dr. Garza,
Is
not
that
for this
okay?
document, because this is follow-up to this particular one. Ms. Evans? You had a suggestion or a comment? On the next steps, did you have any more? You had your
Oh, it was,
hand raised. It's been
Karen
reflected?
already got
All
that,
right.
yeah.
All right, Ms. Schultz.
I just have a question. I don't really understand, they're not numbered, but the one that says explain existing system and how, what is that?
Explain the existing GIS system for use in, sorry. Explain the GIS system and how that differs from the, they're now using a GIS system versus the old way of
Explain
projecting.
it in the document?
To me, that's another one probably that would need to be just let us keep it as a note to self as we continue, because it doesn't necessarily have to change this document, but I understood the sentiment, and that is come back to the board at a work session, discuss how that methodology is different than in the past.
Right,
We'll
we're not
just-
talking about annotating it something in the document itself,
No.
right?
No,
No,
no, so
we're
I think
not.
you're right.
No. So yeah, we should
I think we
that
take
off.
it off, and then we just know that we need to schedule a work session.
All right. So we are good. What we were going to do, we're going to take a 5-minute break. I will then turn over the, let's do a 7-minute break. And I'm so generous, because then I get to turn the meeting over to Ms. Strauss and for budget. But we will start that meeting, Ms. Strauss, with the next steps from the first work session, student success. So we still have to go over those.